CTAM Europe. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm very happy to introduce you to our presenter today, Christian Kurz, SVP of Global Streaming Research and Insights at Paramount. He's based in New York, and he will be presenting and sharing some of their recent research relating to how consumers spend their year. I'll let Christian tell you more about this in his intro. We're scheduled for 45 minutes, which includes time for a Q&A session at the end. So please get involved and use your Q&A button for the questions. As always, the recording of this presentation will be posted on the members-only section of ctameurope.com. If you're not a current member or if you have any further questions about us, please email info@ctameurope.com for more details. I'll follow up by email also about our fabulous lifelong wanted executive management program, which is happening at INSEAD next week. You can either pack your bags very, very quickly, or registration for next year's program will be open soon. So thanks for tuning in, and I will hand you over to Christian. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and hello, everyone. And on top of all of this and the Q&A, we also have some interactivity in the presentation today. So we will be asking you a couple of poll questions as we go through. All right, as Karen said, my name is Christian Kurz, and I head up research for Paramount Global, focusing on the streaming side, so Paramount Plus and Pluto. And what I'm going to be walking you through today is our most recent project called 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? Now, most of you will have guessed by now why 525,600 minutes. Well, because that is the number of minutes in a year. And what we tried to do with this study, or what we are trying to do with the study, is to really understand how consumers do spend their year. So what did we do? During October, we surveyed a total of over 6,000 adults 18 to 64 across 4 countries, the US, the UK, Canada, and Australia. And in essence, what we tried to do, we tried to find out how consumers spend a year engaging with various different activities. Now, as you can imagine, people, ourselves included, are not very good at remembering things very specifically. So what we did is we structured our questions depending on how often consumers are doing various things. So for regular activities, we were asked, like working or commuting or caring for others or chores, we were asking people about how long do you spend doing that in aggregate. For things like eating and personal care, we were talking about how often do you do that and how long does it take every time. We were also looking at sleep, and we were looking at weekday versus weekend to break that down. And then for the rest of the time, we really started to looking at the frequency and duration of regular activities like watching content or socializing. But since you don't go on holiday every day, we were, for those types of activities, asking more around the time, how often a year do you do that, and how long does it happen when it is. So we've really adjusted this in various different ways as we were going through it. And that brings me to the year in the life. So that is where we are. And what you will start seeing throughout today is us building a donut chart that we are slowly starting to fill in with the various activities that consumers are taking, starting with sleep. So 30% of the time that we spend in the average year is spent sleeping. Now, that is the largest chunk of time, not surprisingly, but it also is where we wanted to start. Now, there is an assumption or an empirical observation that as you get older, you spend less time sleeping, and we wanted to dig into that a little bit as well. And we did find that older people seem to think that they are spending less time sleeping than on the younger end, but it actually isn't anywhere near as extreme a discrepancy as I expected it to be. Now, again, we are relying on people's recollection and people's responses to this. We didn't tap into people's sleep watches to measure how long they actually sleep, but this is what they're telling us. So somewhere between 7.5 hours and 7 hours. On average. Now, again, there are definitely days when you sleep less, but this is where it came out. So 7.2 hours on average is how much time 18 to 64-year-olds spend sleeping. Now, next to that, the other thing, the other activity that happens very regularly is working or studying. In this case, we include commuting into this because since the pandemic, it is much easier to think about this as an aggregate chunk of time. And that really takes up about 17% of the year on average. Now, within that, there is clear discrepancies. For full-time workers, they spend 37 and a half hours a week working, including commutes. And for them, that takes up 24% of their time, right? So the 17% is an aggregation of people who are in full-time work, people who are not in full-time work, and also students as well. Now, among those full-time workers, 11% are spending more than 50 hours a week at work, with, of course, multiples of them doing multiple jobs and spending time getting back and forth from them as well. Then we have our day-to-day routine activities. That takes up about 29%, and that takes up around 50% more of the year than working or studying. So that is a significantly more sizable chunk of change here. And we wanted to also point out what is included there, right? So we have childcare, which is about 1.6 hours a day, chores in general, eating 1.3, caring for a pet, and also cooking. And if you add cooking and eating together, you get to 2 hours a day altogether. So that becomes the largest chunk of that day-to-day routine activity combination. Now, of course, again, here, there's going to be some variation because only people with children or have children in their life somehow are going to be spending time on childcare. And that is also why throughout this presentation, sometimes we're looking at parents versus non-parents to point out some of those differences. Then we have vacations and holidays, which are accounting for about 3% of the years. And this is an aggregate of vacation, holidays, and public holidays as well. And the number of vacation days, including holidays celebrated, varies by country. Lowest number is in the US, where the average consumer says they're spending about 11 days either on holiday, vacation, or celebrating a public holiday. That goes up to 15 for Canada and the UK, and it goes up all the way to 17 for Australia. Now, of course, there are more public holidays than those days in some countries. That doesn't mean it's necessarily being celebrated as such. So that's what we wanted to clarify here as well. And the remainder of time to fill up the donut is really free time. And free time, of course, sounds very positive and sounds very nice. So let's dig a little bit more into what that is and what that is made up of. However, before we do that, we wanted to look at those pies by country, and we can see that the US is the country with the lowest percentage of free time, and interestingly, the highest percentage of day-to-day routine activities there. Sleeping is very consistent across markets. So is working and studying on average in aggregate. But really where we're seeing a discrepancy here is the day-to-day routine activities and free times, which is about a fifth in Canada, Australia, and the UK, a fifth in the US and almost about a quarter in Canada, UK, and Australia. Now, we want to also look at this by age brackets, and this is also where we have the parent-non-parent breakout. And you see very clearly that, yes, as I said earlier already, sleep does decrease as you get older. Working and studying is relatively consistent, but then does decrease, obviously, in the 55 to 64 age bracket. Day-to-day routine activities are much more a much bigger chunk of time in the 25 to 44 age bracket, and then free time essentially increases as you get older. Now, if you look at the parent and non-parent break of that, you can very clearly see that parents have no free time, which I'm sure many of you appreciate. And as a non-parent, you do have a much bigger chunk of time available for you to do various other things. So let us dive into that chunk of free time and take a closer look at that. So having free time not only happens, it also really is an important, vital part to balance people's lives in general. So over 90% of people agree to both my free time is important to my overall life balance, and my free time is becoming more important to me as time progresses. So free time really matters to consumers. Now, what are the things that people do in their free time? The number one and number two activities for all age groups are some sort of exercise or physical activity, and then watching TV and movies, so media consumption through very much our lens. That then is followed by reading, gaming, creative hobbies, gardening, music, spending time with family and friends, and then cooking. Now, of course, spending time with family and friends also happens in other parts of the original donut, right? So that's why this number is maybe appearing a little bit smaller. Now, looking at this by country, exercise and physical activity are the number one claimed free time activities in Canada and the UK, number two in the US and Australia, while watching TV and movies are number one in the US and Australia, dropping to number two for Canada and the US. Then reading is consistent, gaming is consistent, and then we see other things popping in various ways as well. Looking at this by age group, this is where you see that gaming is something that is a little bit more important in the younger age and a little bit less important as you get older. Reading is the exact opposite. But we're continuing to see that watching TV, movies, and exercise physical activities are the number one and two activities throughout the age groups, and are consistently there for consumers. So most of what people do in their free time is a routine or planned activity. So almost half of free time is spent doing something that you do all the time or that you've specifically planned for. So that includes things like checking my personal email, watching TV and movies, and using social media. Then the specific plan is things like attending a wedding, a live performance, music or arts event, a concert. All of these various things are falling into planned events. And then just under a third of free time is spent with spontaneous activities. Things like playing board games and puzzles, lounging around, which is an incredibly important part of my free time, and then also having sex. And since we asked about it, we wanted to dig into that a little bit more deeply. And if you calculate that out, that means the average respondent to our survey spends 5 days and 9 hours a year having sex. Now, that is clearly where you can start thinking about your own personal life and judge yourself against the average recollection of consumers. Right? Again, this is a survey. Right, trips and days out account for about 3% of the year. That includes activities such as attending a religious service, spending time at the beach, pool, lake, getting a haircut, volunteering, attending a live sporting event or concerts or various things. So what we're doing now is we're filling that free time share in with more specific things here. Socializing and recreation is the next chunk with about 5% of the year, and that is where the lounging around doing nothing is becoming quite important and at the top of the list, ahead of spending time with family or friends at home, engaging in physical activities, and then engaging a hobby, and then it drops off to much smaller percentages. And then the rest, the 12% of that pie, is dedicated media time. And that means this is time where you just engage with media. You are not doing anything else. And I'll come back to that in a second again. So the key media activities during free time include, of course, watching content, which we like, browsing the internet, using social media, and various things. And we do see some age differences here, which we'll look at again in a second as well. But it also includes things like listening to music, staying in touch with somebody via texting or phone calls, video games. All of those various elements are part of the dedicated media time. That means it's 12 hours a day. So dedicated media time represents 12% of the year, or around 3 hours a day. But through multitasking, people are actually increasing those 3 hours a day to 12 hours a day of time engaging with media. So the multitasking is really coming through very clearly here. And that brings us to the first quiz time. We have 3 questions for you, which Karen is going to pop up, and then we will test your knowledge or your guessing prowess across this. So first question is, with multitasking, instead of the 525,600 minutes, how much time do people actually have in a year? And the answer options I'm giving you is either 600,000 minutes, 700,000 minutes, or 800,000 minutes. So please cast your votes now. And Karen, once you have them, can you put up the results, please?
Now,
I
I think
can't
I
see
might
the
have to do
answers
this
yet.
manually. Is that not on the screen now, Christian?
I only see select answer. I
Right.
also don't see the
So
answer options, but I don't know if that's
I
because I'm a
will have to
panelist.
tell you, I think I'll have to tell them to you manually then. So we have got 18% have said 600,000 minutes, 45% is 700,000 minutes, and then it goes down to 36% for 800,000 minutes.
All right, let's see how you did. The smallest number got the question right. So with multitasking, people are stretching the amount of time available to just under 800,000 minutes in a year. So making the year more than half longer. So every year we live a year and a half, which obviously explains why we're all aging so quickly. Um, all right, so that's question one. Question two, which country or people in which country are best at multitasking? Is that the US, Australia, Canada, or the UK? Cast your votes now.
Oh, I'm loving this, Christian. I feel like I'm on a game show.
Yes, you're the host.
Absolutely. Right, I think that's everybody. So we have got 0% for Australian. We have got
Well,
8%
that's
for
because of the time
Canada.
zone. We just have no Australians on the call.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. We have 8% for Canada, 25% for the UK, and then a whopping 67% for USA.
And you got it right. The US is the country that does the most multitasking. In the US, the year becomes 71% longer through multitasking. In the UK, it is that average of 50, and in Canada, we're 44% longer. And in Australia, that is the lowest country of them all, with 39% longer. All right, last question, one more time. Which age group
Okay.
is best at multitasking? Is that 18 to 24s, 25 to 34s, 35 to 44s, 45 to 54s, or 55 to 64s?
Here we go. So we have 0%, 45 to 54, which is mine. So I'm quite good at multitasking. Then we have 8% joint for 18 to 24 and 55 to 64. We have 31% for 34 to 44. And then the highest is 46% at 25 to 34.
Thank you, Karen. And again, the majority got it right. It is the 25 to 34s who have the highest. Oh, I can see the results now.
Oh,
They just popped up. But yes, the highest percentage is 25 to 34s, but it's just marginally higher than both 18 to 24s and 35 to 44s. So the majority of you guys are definitely in the right ballpark. And instead of the 525,600 minutes for 25 to 34s, that makes the year 884,546 minutes long. So they are making their year 68% longer through multitasking. All right. Well, thanks for humoring me in that endeavor of adding a bit of interactivity here. Going back to our donut chart, so if you look at the dedicated media time of 12%, you add the multitasking area here, and multitasking, I would like to think, happens at any time of the day or year, except when you're asleep. So that's what we're indicating with this extra crescent on here. So multitasking is really happening throughout the year, the day. It happens while socializing, it happens while traveling on day-to-day activities, and also during working and studying. And that means that all of our media activities are increasing significantly. So what that does to watching content is it takes that up from the 2.2% of dedicated media time to 5.7% of the 525,600 minutes through the multitasking. And we wanted to look at that media time a little bit in more detail as well. And this is where we're looking at this by age group again. So what we're seeing is that media time overall, or sorry, multitasking overall, is decreasing over the age groups. But what we are very clearly seeing is that social media use is decreasing, gaming use is decreasing, audio use is decreasing, but TV and movie use is absolutely increasing as you're getting older, right? So 55 to 64-year-olds have a much more meaningful, not only percentage, but also total duration of media time spent on TV and movies. Again, this is not rocket science. We all know this instinctively and through our various measurement pieces, but it's interesting to see how that really triangulates across the board. We also wanted to look at the parent versus non-parent, and really the only difference here is that non-parents have a slightly larger chunk spent on TV and movies, but really the differences here between parents and non-parents is not that drastic as we've seen in other parts of the study. Looking at this across country again as well. So US, we've already established, is the highest country here. Also spends more time with TV and movies, followed by the UK, not very far behind. And then we have Canada and Australia, just a little bit lower across the board here as well. Now, media, as we all know, helps people with many of their key emotional motivations, and this came out again very clearly within this study as well. Particularly happiness, calmness, relaxation, as well as exploration are something that consumers feel media activities help them achieve in their lives. So those three, happiness, calmness, and relaxation and exploration, are very, very much up there as benefits through media time or media activities. And media time, as claimed by respondents, is the #1 mood booster for them. So the top 10 activities that improve my mood are watching TV shows and movies, spending time with my partner, catching up on sleep, listening to music, and many other things. But watching TV shows and movies is the clear #1 across the board here. So that already brings us to summing up, and I know there's one question in the Q&A already, so now is the time to start adding more Qs so that we can talk about the As if you have any. So re-looking at our donut and bringing it all together here. So taking everything together we've covered into account, this is how people are spending their 525,600 minutes, with the multitasking added to it as well, and broken out the various different elements of media, dedicated media time here as well. So you can see that sleeping is the biggest chunk that we spend on time, followed by day-to-day activities, then working, studying with a various representation. But if you then take multitasking into effect, very clearly media time is a very, very large portion of what we do. And of course, multitasking is a big portion of that. So people are packing an awful lot into their time through multitasking, making their year about half longer than it needed to be. And with that, media very, very much sits at the center of multitasking. Consumers are engaging with a wide range of media to fulfill a lot of needs, including, of course, happiness, relaxation, and improving health and wellness. Exploring new ideas and control is really stuff that media helps consumers with it. Different media meets different needs, but watching content is playing a very vital role for consumers. It is the #1 for making people feel in control. It is the #1 mood booster, as we established already. And it also is the #2 top of mind activity associated with free time in the first place. So there's a positive association between media and free time. So with so much competing for their time, people are very often looking for ways to make the most of it. So some successful brands are helping consumers create more time in their year to engage with the things that they want to do, or serve as a rewarding destination in their own right, worthy of their attention. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but just surface to say, just 4 examples that I'm going to quickly talk through about how brands and companies are taking advantage of that to essentially provide more time to consumers. Now, Instacart, shopping delivery app, clearly, or service, clearly is intended to provide more time to consumers by taking away some time that they would otherwise have to spend on chores like grocery shopping. So delivery services overall and in general are really harking into that, to create more time. Now, a second example we have is Calm, which is an app that tries to encourage consumers to take the necessary breaks in their time, but using a form of media to help relaxation. So again, this is driving into the media helps people relax area there. Copilot or any other AI service really is designed to enhance productivity by assisting consumers, not just in the workplace, but also in your personal life with looking at various tasks across whatever you do in a digital world and making that faster and easier. And we'll see how that develops and plays out. And then lastly, just looking at one of our own services, Pluto TV, the fast service that started it all. We were first and fast, and we're remaining to be fast first. Really what that does is it provides users with an easy and fast access into content in 13 minutes deciding what to watch, on a fast service that drops you into a linear channel, and provides a wide range of easygoing content. It is the TV equivalent of easy listening radio in various ways as a category. And that's really it. So thank you so much. I look forward to answering your questions in the Q&A, but there's also my email address on here should you have any questions that you don't want to ask in public forum. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will look at that first question that's in there. If I can find it. Go. All right. Question from David. Any attempt to regulate the data with diaries or similar methods? And comparing self-reported figures with diary often reveals considerable differences. Yes, it does, and yes, we did. Interesting thing is that where we are starting to see differences are in the more nuanced elements. So you mentioned listening to music. Yes, absolutely, and that is, or we believe, partly because a lot of that is an unconscious activity or subconscious activity. It's just something you don't necessarily remember. Did do a diary version of the study a number of years ago, and we were actually positively encouraged by how close this got to similar results, and we've also compared it with other work that's out there. So, given diaries become more expensive depending on how frequently you ask people, or even pop-ups throughout the day. We found that the cost-benefit analysis leading us to this, the results are close enough and good enough to not spend extra money or trying the other approaches at this point. That was that. Any other questions? All right. Is there any data relating to men and women? So we've pulled it out in parts of the slide. I didn't talk through it, but Karen said the recording of this is going to be made available. If you go look through the slides again, in some other charts we do call out men and women. It doesn't really make much difference. The only noticeable metric that I noticed was for women, the number 2 is of or claimed activity is reading, which drops the male on average number 2 down to number 3. Largely, there weren't that much differences that we noticed. Now, I did not look at the chores division between genders. That is probably. Any other questions?
I don't think we do on there. And I think your Wi-Fi might have just been going a little bit iffy at the end then. But we heard
Oh,
everything. That was
that's
fabulous.
the beauty of sitting in a hotel room. I'm sorry.
Absolutely, absolutely. But we're so glad that you did manage to be able to join us, even from the hotel. I could actually listen to your presentations and look at all the research all the time. It's fabulous. So thank you very much. And I know your email was on that last slide, I think, then, wasn't it? So if anybody has any
Yeah.
further questions, then feel free to reach out to Christian or email us directly on info@ctameurope.com. And I will follow up. If anybody needs to see the recording because there was so much to take in, then do let me know. So thank you, Christian. It was fabulous once again. And thanks
Thank you for
everybody for
having me.
joining. Oh, hold on, we have one more question. Oh no, many thanks. It helps a lot.
All
So
right.
thank you,
Okay.
everyone, and
Well,
thank
thank you guys.
you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
See
Bye-bye.
you next time. Thank you. Bye.